Hi, I want to make a video on the subject of people, trying to convince people, having some consistency between people and their ideology, what they believe and know to be true, and actually acting on that ideology as opposed to just to um, to practice this ideology as opposed to just letting it be an ideology they have, practicing an ideology, feeling it, becoming one with the ideology as opposed to just saying it and then moving on with it, almost in a way allowing you to become an easier hypocrite in a way. If you don't practice it, if you don't let it become part of your everyday grind, because all we're doing is grinding, really, grinding the bits and the bones, and generally speaking, unless we make it part of the grind, it's going to become back and bite us in many ways. And generally speaking, you don't practice. Um, Especially, obviously, this is having to do with antinatalism and things like that, believing a certain ideology, but generally speaking, for anything, about trying to convince people to practice what they preach. Obviously, we know this doesn't work always, and obviously, a good example is religion. A lot of people don't um, practice what they preach, at least based on the on whatever ideology they're practicing based on a book, even if their ideology is based on what they say as opposed to what's in the book. I say misconstruing what the book may have said, or whatever ideology they may have said. It's about what you say you believe, and then practicing what you believe, and then or misconstruing something from a book, or not following what a book says, and completely ignoring that, um, and make even if what your interpretation is wrong or um, not right, completely fallacious, and doesn't matter. You say you believe it, and then you don't actually reinforce those beliefs with action or practicing principles based on those beliefs. It's in many ways you just ignore it, which is not always a good thing. It's never a good thing. But ignoring it when it comes to your principles and what you claim, and then not doing it, it's almost lying. Maybe denial, lying to yourself, whatever it may be. But when it comes to this antinatalism thing, especially, a lot of people seem to be fickle with their words and their actions. They say one thing, then they change the subject or change what they believe the next time. It's a general problem I would have to say is that we have to deal with, that everyone's dealing with, that everyone is a victim of or is a perpetrator of, and doing this kind of wishy-washy belief or wishy-washy inability to have an ideology and practice it, and using that and almost in a way living the ideology or living a certain form or a certain set of principles, which a lot of people seem to have difficulty doing. Unless the principles are bad and they're selfish principles, that's the only time people are consistent with the principles they have when it comes to following some kind of ideology. And it's easier to be selfish and reinforce your own principles and seem consistent. Like, oh, he's a good guy, but he's very selfish. He's honest. Yeah, because he's selfish. It's easy to be honest when you're selfish. At least easier than being not being selfish and doing the same exact thing and being honest. Obviously, it's not the same thing. It's hard to be honest um, and not be selfish, apparently, for most people. But at least when it comes to a certain set of ideologies that would be against what society expects from a certain person or a group of people, as based on standards, based on society creating those standards, regardless. Yes, but getting people to practice what they preach, and the main thing that got me on this is obviously antinatalism, or the idea of pressing the red button, or whatever it may be, making sure people don't find ways to find little cracks in their inability or ability to portray an ideology or whatever it may be. It's about practicing what you preach, and in general, that's something that you should do unless it's obviously dangerous. Obviously, can work there, but it's not a black and white issue, obviously, but it's something that should be considered, at least when being honesty, and I think honesty is more important than anything, and if your honesty is being dishonest, at least acknowledging that dishonesty. You almost using that as an example, going back to the example I was doing with honest but true but dishonest, being truthful, being dishonest, or whatever it may be, the ends justifying the means. It is ultimately about getting people to be consistent with their ideologies. And just because it's wrong in one case doesn't mean the honesty attributed to that, it can't be something that can be taken away. Um, Almost in a way being more honest with yourself or the ideology that you should be sharing. But a lot of people seem to not be able to do that. A lot of inconsistencies, a lot of issues with being honest and consistent with what they say and the differences that they say and what they practice. But obviously, practicing some kind of ideology or religion or whatever it may be is observe the facts first, and then it's about being honest with yourself and what you say are the facts first. And obviously, it's on you once you know what the facts are, or at least as much as you can, at least explain that it's not always the facts aren't always explained thoroughly, or give at least a basic definition or a basic background to how valid certain things may be. And then it's about being honest with yourself and what you're willing to tell other people and what the information you're willing to spread yourself. Obviously, there's ignorance and there's willful deceit, and that's in many cases what you have to deal with and figure out what the solution to the problem is if the person's being either ignorant or willfully wrong, willfully ignorant, or whatever, maybe not knowing, wanting to know so you don't find out, or being in denial. Obviously, all these kinds of psychological things that get in the way of the truth in many circumstances, not only to other people, but to yourself or ourselves as an individual. It's obviously not always the easiest thing. So it's a constant uphill battle when it comes to that kind of stuff. So you have to constantly try and figure those things out. Um, but anyway, um, practicing what you preach. Practice this. Practice. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes better. But yeah, practicing what you're preaching. You can't even do it if you're not practicing. If you're not practicing some kind of ideology that concerning a specific ideology. If it's wrong, obviously that, like I mentioned before, it can be a black and white issue. But practicing what you preach, willfully being wrong, following something wrong to begin with, and then lying about the facts that you know about that being wrong, and then spreading that around. Obviously, that could just lead to a very bad cycle of things. Um, and a lot of one wrong thing after another, leading to just a whole entirely scrambled mess, leading to nothing. And that's obviously an issue that needs to be taken care of. But mostly, it's about, yeah, getting people to practice not only an ideology, but what they know to be true. That's another part of the subject I just remembered, and it's something that is obviously important once you know it's true, and you're not obviously not lying to yourself or anything. You need to make sure that you practice as much as you can. Like I've mentioned before, just because you know it's the truth, or someone guilts you into it, doesn't mean you have to do it, but knowing it and practicing it is obviously something that we should try towards at least getting more and more that way. Not lie. If you're lying, acknowledge that you're lying. And if you're lying, try not to lie next time, and doing so on and so forth. Don't lie. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't do any of those things. Try your best to fight against that tendency that many people have, fooling or living a falsehood or living fantasy. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with living a fantasy in your personal life when it's not getting in the way of your philosophy. So as long as it's not interacting as much, then you should be fine. So mostly, I guess, I don't know. Yes. Once you know it's true, you should do your best to practice what you know the truth to be. And if you know it, or at least you're not just acknowledging it and then moving on, and you were almost lying when you said you believe something, and try your best to practice what you preach. Almost in a way, live what your basic overall understanding of the world is. If fire is hot, you avoid fire. Obviously, all the negative things, and we realize that all those negative things we don't think about generally speaking. We just think about one specific thing being negative. Our lives are negative, or the specific circumstances negative. It's not life being negative, allowing these things to happen, not Jesus or God, all these enablers of negativity, even though they have all the apparently all the so-called ability to change these things. It's right in their hand, right in their grasp, but they're not taking it. So I guess how they explain that, weird. I guess there's no explanation for that one. But regardless, once you know it to be true, once you have an ideology based on the truth, I guess tying those two basic points together, then you try your best to follow, at least acknowledge the reality. Obviously, you don't have to live it entirely, but acknowledge it when at least having an honest discussion about what the subject is or the ideology is. You don't change it based on emotional attachments and emotional predispositions based on um, personality defects or whatever it may be. But understand what you're going to and where you're coming from when you discuss these topics and know where the truth lies, and you have to believe it based on the truth to begin with. So it's something that relies mostly on understanding and hopefully spreading that understanding as much as you can. So that's the ultimate goal, mostly. So regarding that, once you know it's true, do your best to reinforce that with action. I guess is the ultimate thing you can take away and applying that to an ideology that has to do with the truth. Once you know the truth, and spreading that truth and living the truth as much as you can, at least when it's related to the truth and the actions that you're doing are related to the truth. Do your best to apply those ideologies or those truths to your everyday actions, and trying to make those everyday actions lead to a better end or a better journey or whatever it may be. But that's the ultimate goal, is to change that for that circumstance. It's not just a circumstance; it's all of this life game. So it's the whole life game, not just the circumstances. It's not just the circumstances; it's the whole game. It's the game allowing all these things to happen. Even if you have the good ones, those things are based on all sorts of tensions and build-ups, and tensions and building up, and based on the biological machine, based on this whole game that we're playing. There's no other way for the game to be played or made. It's based on this tension thing, regardless of how good it is, regardless of how much it doesn't seem so. Even though you're not really suffering right now, it doesn't mean it's not always negative. It doesn't mean that and it's about the cost. If it means something for you based on your delusions, it doesn't mean it's not costing anyone anything else. It's always going to cost someone something else. Obviously, you can be at your own detriment, but it's impossible to be at your own detriment when there's other people around being the detriment without. You can't affect yourself without affecting someone else if there's another living thing. So in a way, it's almost like saying the game's not worth living because of all the negative in and of itself, regardless of your own personal position or your personal delusion or belief. All the positives that you feel like are worth it, even though you don't really see it. Um, how much they're not worth it doesn't mean that they're worth it, and it's the cost in the end. Even if you are deluded enough to think it's worth it, it's negative on your part. You ignore the other negative, or whatever it may be. You ignore the negative, the fact that it is a negative thing, or you're too ignorant to realize it, or you haven't recognized it yet. It's all based on negative, and it's not worth the cost based on other that it's applied to other living things, because it's impossible to do it when it's on the same scape, on the same reality. There's no way to avoid it, regardless of where you are, what you're doing. So it's still something that's saying it's not worth the cost. And the cost, if there's no one else's, the cost is going to come on your hands now. And finding it worth it's just a delusion based on addiction. Nothing more, nothing less. So it's negative regardless, and the negative is going to come, the real negative, as opposed to the tension that you're being deluded into believing is worth it. A real negative is going to come regardless of someone else being there or no one else being there. So it's going to be there regardless. It's a zero-sum game that works only on building up tensions and relieving those tensions, relinquishing them. And that's the only thing that's happening in this game, nothing else. So do your best to practice what you preach based on the truth. Preach the truth and do your best to practice the truth is the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing now. The ultimate thing to take away from this video. Take the most that you can from the truth. Do your best. Find the truth. If you need to, base it on an ideology, base whatever, maybe a philosophy, and follow your best and practice it the most. Almost in a way, ingrain your psychology in the thing. Even if it may be detrimental, living in the truth, even if you're not necessarily living it always in your personal life, what's right and wrong and this and that, doesn't mean there's not an objective truth. It's always happening. Your opinion doesn't mean anything. It's just some delusion in your head. It only means something because it's in a living thing that can feel's head, but it still exists. But do your best to live the truth, because it's something worth doing, even if it is a detriment. In the end, you realize living the truth is a very useful thing, even if it doesn't always have its bright sides. Obviously, if we all live the truth, we can still realize that we can still separate those fantasies from the truth, and we can still live those things separately, regardless. They still exist regardless. Obviously, you have an opinion. That's the subjective opinion. Objectively, it exists. The facts based on our opinions. The facts exist, and we have an opinion, but that opinion itself exists as well. So it's something that exists. Almost take a step outside yourself for a second and look. Even though it's my opinion and it's subjective, doesn't mean anything else is changing. It just means that the thing is changing, but it's not changing based on my based on me. It's changing outside of my. It's changing, but it's changing outside of me, not in me. And I'm not creating this world. It's only based on my opinion. And your opinion is nothing more than a self-aggrandizing delusion that we put so much behind. But it's still something that exists in the reality. And take a step outside yourself and realize, yes, my opinion still exists in the same world, and it's still objectively existing. That's just the distinction you have to make. It's still objectively existing. It's just a different objective thing existing. Just take a step out, look at yourself making that opinion or saying that statement or thinking this or doing that. It still exists regardless. Apparently it's confusing. It confuses me why people can't make that distinction. It exists, regardless. Yes, that's really all of a sudden a subjective opinion, but it objectively exists. But my subjective opinion makes everything subjective. No, you know it objectively exists, and you know it's existing in an objective world. It's just you have a different. It's something's different happening in your own psychology that's happening. That's being made into the real world. Obviously, it's basing everything on the real world. Everything that happens. Now, this happened. We talk about these things that happened. Yeah, where's that basis coming from? Are we just confusing things? No, I don't think we are. I just think you're confusing yourself, and you're causing confusion in conversation when you don't acknowledge it's existing objectively, and it is existing objectively. Regardless of that, it's just making those proper distinctions in an argument, understanding where exactly it's coming from and going. So yes, regardless of your opinion, you do realize there is an objective thing that you're talking about that really did happen, unless you just want to base it off consensus. Did this really happen? I don't believe it happened. So okay, well, I guess I can't talk to you because your subjective mind said no, but it's subjective mind and a reality that's existing consistently, objectively throughout all of these thinking, feeling things. So it's about making the proper distinctions and understanding where the other person, the wrong person, is coming from, and understanding and letting the right person have the obligation to tell the wrong person where the confusion is happening, at least as best they can, or at least try to find a common consensus where you can both agree, and then going from there and realizing that there is some place that this can lead, an objective truth, regardless. Anyway, that's really all I need to say. Sorry I changed subjects again. It happens when you make videos. It's hard not to change subjects when you want to get through thoroughly through a point entirely, but sometimes it just happens. So yeah, an objective truth, and yes, when you know the truth, do your best to practice the truth, almost ingrain it to your psychology, and so on and so forth. That's really all I want to mention. So do your best, and principally, it's almost best, regardless of the ends, justifying the means. Principle, once you know the truth, it's best to realize, at least even if before you know the truth, that it's best to base it on principle. and not to be a hypocrite or whatever it is. Do principally know the truth, but obviously, if you're not knowing the truth, you're probably a hypocrite naturally. And obviously, once you know the truth, you're more be a hypocrite or whatever, jokingly, or you're more willing to separate these things and make proper distinctions, realize more on the truth side, less likely you're going to be a hypocrite, or less like more likely to be principled, as opposed to not being principled because it bases itself on fact, usually principle. In certain situations where you know a certain outcome or a certain set of situations are going to happen based on previous events and so on and so forth. I don't know where I'm going, but anyway, yeah, I think that's all I need to say. So thank you, and until next time, bye.